The sun was setting over Hillcrest Estates, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns that seemed measured with rulers. In this neighborhood, not a hedge grew out of place, not a mailbox stood painted the wrong shade, and certainly no holiday decorations remained up past their acceptable dates. This wasn't by chance. It was all thanks to Margaret Whitfield. For 15 long years, Margaret had ruled the Homeowners Association with what some called dedication and others called ruthless obsession. Her gray hair was always pulled back in a tight bun, her lips often pursed in disapproval as she walked the neighborhood with her clipboard, hunting for violations. Neighbors would literally rush inside when they saw her coming down the street. "Your grass is half an inch too tall," she'd snap at Mrs. Johnson, who was struggling with arthritis. "Those wind chimes aren't on the approved list," she'd tell the Chen family, who had hung them in memory of their grandmother. The neighbors had a nickname for her behind her back, the HOA Dragon. Some had tried to vote her out, but Margaret had a loyal group of older residents who believed she was maintaining standards and protecting property values. Everything changed on a bright Tuesday morning when 3 sleek black cars pulled up to the abandoned mansion at the end of Oakwood Drive. Out stepped Elon Marsh, tech billionaire and one of the richest men in the world, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. "Did you get?" whispered Tom from across the street to his wife. "That tech guy just bought the old Henderson place. Paid cash, didn't even negotiate." Word spread fast. By afternoon, Margaret was storming into the real estate office demanding answers. "What do you mean he's planning to remodel?" she barked at the agent. "All external changes need HOA approval." Within days, glossy architectural plans arrived at Margaret's door. As she flipped through them, her face grew redder by the minute. Glass walls, solar panels covering the roof, and something called a sustainable living ecosystem. This was not the colonial revival style mandated in Section 4, Paragraph 7 of the HOA guidelines. At the emergency board meeting, Margaret slammed her hand on the table. "This will destroy the character of our neighborhood." But even her most loyal supporters seemed impressed by the beautiful designs, and perhaps more so by Elon's net worth and potential impact on their own property values. The plans passed with only Margaret voting against them. Over the next few months, Margaret watched with growing fury as the old Henderson mansion transformed. Workers swarmed the property daily. Delivery trucks brought strange equipment. The traditional brick facade vanished behind sleek modern materials. "Look at all those solar panels," huffed Margaret to anyone who would listen. "It looks like a spaceship landed in our neighborhood." What really set her blood boiling was how the other neighbors seemed charmed by Elon. He'd wave cheerfully from his electric car. He invited the local school science club for a tour. He promised that his renewable energy system would eventually provide cheaper electricity for the whole community. "He thinks he can just buy everyone's approval," Margaret muttered, watching from her window as Elon chatted with a group of impressed neighbors beside his newly installed charging stations. The final straw came when bulldozers arrived to clear the back 5 acres of Elon's property. Within weeks, rows upon rows of massive solar panels stood gleaming in the sun, a private solar farm that Elon claimed would generate enough clean energy for half the neighborhood. Margaret stared at it from her back porch, a plan already forming in her mind. If he had that much electricity to spare, surely he wouldn't miss a little bit of it. Elon Marsh stood in his gleaming home office, frowning at the colorful charts on his tablet. Something wasn't adding up. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, swiping through screen after screen of data. It had been 3 months since he'd moved into his renovated smart home. The massive solar farm was working perfectly. On sunny days, it generated enough electricity to power his entire property and still have plenty left over. The extra power was stored in a row of sleek battery units in the basement, ready for cloudy days or nighttime use. But over the past few weeks, the batteries were draining much faster than they should. At first, Elon thought it might be a calculation error or maybe one of his new electric cars was pulling more power than expected. He built this system himself, and he knew every wire and connection by heart. "Hey Raj, got a minute?" Elon called to his chief engineer, who was working in the next room. Raj poked his head in, coffee mug in hand. "What's up, boss?" "These power numbers look off to me. We're losing juice somewhere." The two men spent hours going over the system, checking and double-checking their calculations. Everything seemed to be working correctly, but electricity was definitely disappearing. "It's like someone's siphoning it off," Reg said, half joking. Then they looked at each other as the same thought struck them both. "You don't think?" Elon began. "Only one way to find out," said Raj. That night, they installed tiny surveillance cameras around the property, focusing on the main junction boxes where someone could potentially tap into the system. The cameras were so small and well hidden that no one would spot them unless they knew exactly where to look. For 2 days, nothing happened. On the third night, around 2 a.m., Elon's phone buzzed with an alert. One of the cameras had detected movement. Still half asleep, he grabbed his tablet and tapped the alert. The night vision footage showed a figure in dark clothing moving carefully around the junction box at the far edge of his property where his land met the street. The person was wearing a hoodie pulled low, but when they turned to look around, the camera caught their face clearly. "You've got to be kidding me," Elon whispered, suddenly wide awake. It was Margaret Whitfield, the HOA president herself. The next morning, Elon and Raj did a thorough inspection of the junction box. What they found was both impressive and infuriating. Someone had installed a professional-grade connection that diverted electricity directly from Elon's system. The work was neat and carefully hidden. This wasn't some amateur job. "This had to be done by a professional," Raj said, examining the wiring. "No way she did this herself." Elon made some calls. It didn't take long to track down the truth. 3 weeks earlier, Margaret had hired a local electrician named Pete to install landscape lighting at her home. Pete remembered it well because Margaret had insisted he work in the evening to avoid disrupting the neighbors with noise. "She told me the line needed to connect to the main grid access point near the property line," Pete told Elon over the phone, sounding worried. "Said she had permission and everything. Oh man, I never would have done it if I'd known." Elon assured Pete he wasn't in trouble, thanked him for the information, and hung up. "So that's how she did it," Elon told Raj. "She's been stealing my electricity for nearly a month. With the amount she's taking, she's probably powering her entire house on my dime." Raj whistled. "What are you going to do?" Elon stared at the security footage playing on his tablet. There was Margaret, HOA queen and neighborhood terror, committing straight-up theft in the middle of the night. "First, I'm going to find out exactly how much she's stolen." Then he smiled grimly. "I think it's time Mrs. Whitfield and I had a little chat about property rights." While Raj got to work calculating the stolen electricity, Elon couldn't help wondering what had driven Margaret, a woman so obsessed with rules and property values, to become a common thief. Elon paced back and forth in his kitchen, rehearsing what he wanted to say. He could have called the police right away. Theft is theft after all. But something made him want to face Margaret directly first. "Keep it calm, keep it professional," he reminded himself as he checked his watch. He'd invited Margaret over for coffee that morning with a friendly text. "Would love to discuss some neighborhood energy initiatives. My place at 10. She'd agreed immediately, probably thinking she could spy on his home setup. At exactly 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Elon took a deep breath and opened the door. "Margaret, thanks for coming," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Margaret stood there in her crisp beige pantsuit, clutching her ever-present clipboard. "Your gardens are 3 inches taller than the HOA guidelines permit," she said instead of hello, pointing to his native wildflower beds. "We can discuss that another time," Elon said, stepping aside to let her in. "Coffee, tea?" "Coffee, black," she replied, looking around with barely disguised curiosity. His home was a blend of cozy and futuristic, warm wood floors and comfortable furniture paired with smart technology that controlled everything from temperature to lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the solar farm in the distance. "Quite a place you've built," Margaret said stiffly as she sat at the kitchen island. "Very modern." Elon placed a coffee mug in front of her and sat down across from her. The moment of small talk was over. "Margaret, I know what you've been doing." Her hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. "I don't know what you mean." Elon opened his tablet and turned the screen toward her. "This is from 3 nights ago at 2:17 a.m. The video played clearly, Margaret at his junction box, checking her illegal connection. Her face, illuminated by the small flashlight she held, was unmistakable. Margaret's cheeks flushed red, but she didn't look ashamed, she looked angry. "So you've been spying on me," she snapped. "I've been investigating why my power system was losing electricity," Elon replied evenly. "And I found out you've been stealing it." Margaret straightened in her chair. "I wouldn't call it stealing." Elon raised his eyebrows. "No. What would you call secretly connecting to someone's private electrical system without their knowledge or permission?" "Utilizing community resources," she said, chin lifting. "You're generating excessive power on a residential lot, which is against the spirit of our neighborhood covenants." Elon couldn't believe what he was hearing. He'd expected excuses, maybe even apologies, not this bold justification. "The electricity my system generates is my private property," he explained slowly, as if talking to a child. "Just like the vegetables from someone's garden or the car in their garage." "You think you can just move in here with your billions and change everything," Margaret said, her voice rising. "Those solar panels are an eyesore. That electricity is being generated in our neighborhood airspace." "Neighborhood airspace?" Elon repeated, bewildered. "That's not a thing, Margaret." "Well, it should be," she snapped, standing up so quickly her chair wobbled. "You tech people think you own everything. You come in here with your fancy ideas and expect everyone to bow down." Elon stayed seated, keeping his voice level. "Look, I plan to offer clean energy to the whole neighborhood once the system was fully tested. I've mentioned this at the last 2 community meetings. But what you did is still theft, and it's still illegal." "So what, you're going to sue me?" Margaret laughed, but there was nervousness behind it. "I hope it doesn't come to that," Elon said quietly. "But you've stolen thousands of dollars worth of electricity, and your illegal connection could have caused a fire or other damage." Margaret's face hardened. "Don't threaten me, Mr. Marsh. I've been running this neighborhood since before you made your first million. The board will back me up." She grabbed her clipboard and headed for the door, then turned back with a cold smile. "You should know that the HOA has strict rules about commercial energy production on residential property. Very strict rules." The door slammed behind her, rattling the windows. Elon sat there for a long moment, stunned by her reaction. He'd expected denial, maybe even tears, not threats. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. "Hey Frank," he said, "I think we might have a problem." The next morning, bright orange papers appeared on every door in Hillcrest Estates. "Emergency HOA and ETING, TUNIGHT 7 p.m. Community Center" was printed in bold letters across the top. She didn't waste any time, Elon muttered as he plucked the notice from his door. By 6:45 p.m., the community center was packed. Neighbors whispered among themselves, wondering what the emergency could be. Many nodded politely to Elon when he walked in, but a few older residents gave him cold stares. At exactly 7 p.m., Margaret strode to the front of the room, flanked by 4 elderly board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Margaret began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "But we face an urgent threat to our community's character and safety." She clicked a remote, and a photo of Elon's solar farm appeared on the screen behind her. "This," she said dramatically, "is an industrial power plant operating in a residential zone." For the next 20 minutes, Margaret put on quite a show. She showed zoomed-in photos of Elon's solar panels, claiming they created dangerous glare for drivers. She presented a chart with plummeting property values, though the numbers seemed to come from nowhere. She even suggested the electromagnetic fields from his battery storage might cause cancer. "This is ridiculous," a younger homeowner called out. "Those solar panels are on his private property." "Order, please," Margaret snapped. "As HOA president, it's my duty to protect this neighborhood from commercial intrusions. The bylaws clearly state that residential properties cannot be used for business purposes." Elon raised his hand patiently, waiting to be recognized. Margaret pretended not to see him. "I move that we ban all industrial-scale energy production in Hillcrest Estates, effective immediately," Margaret announced. "All in favor?" The 4 board members raised their hands, though 2 looked uncomfortable doing so. Margaret quickly declared the motion passed before anyone could object. "Wait a minute," Elon stood up. "Don't homeowners get to vote on bylaw changes?" Margaret smiled thinly. "This isn't a bylaw change, Mr. Marsh. It's enforcement of existing rules against commercial activity. The board has full authority. Several neighbors protested loudly, but Margaret banged her gavel and declared the meeting adjourned. As people filed out, she marched over to Elon and handed him an official-looking letter. "You have 30 days to remove that monstrosity from your property," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "or face daily fines of $1,000. Elon tucked the letter into his pocket without looking at it. "You know this won't stand up legally, Margaret." Her smile never faltered. "We'll see about that." Back at home, Elon called an emergency meeting with his own team. His lawyer Frank arrived first, followed by Raj and 2 other engineers who had helped design the solar system. "She's really going through with this," Elon explained after showing them the cease and desist letter. "But there's something else you should know." He played the security footage of Margaret stealing electricity, then showed them the data his team had collected. "Based on our calculations, she's stolen approximately $42,000 worth of electricity over the past 3 months, Raj explained, pointing to the charts. But that's not the worst part. The worst part, it turned out, was that Margaret's illegal connection had caused power surges that damaged sensitive equipment in Elon's basement lab. Equipment that was being used to develop revolutionary new battery technology, work worth potentially billions. The prototype overheated during one of the surges, explained Lee, the lead battery engineer. "We lost 3 months of testing data and the physical prototype was damaged. We'll have to rebuild it from scratch." Frank, the lawyer, whistled softly. "This goes way beyond petty theft. We're talking criminal damage to property, potential industrial espionage if she knew what was in that lab." "I don't think she knew," Elon said, shaking his head. "This is about power, her power. She can't stand that someone moved into her territory and doesn't bow to her authority." "So what's our next move?" asked Raj. Elon looked at his lawyer. "I wanted to handle this quietly, but she's left me no choice." Frank nodded, already pulling out his phone. "I'll have the paperwork ready by morning. She has no idea what's about to hit her." Margaret was enjoying her morning coffee and feeling quite pleased with herself. She'd shown that tech billionaire who really ran Hillcrest Estates. The cease and desist letter was just the beginning. Soon she'd have those ugly solar panels torn down and everything back to normal. The doorbell rang. Standing on her porch was a young woman in a suit, holding a thick envelope. "Margaret Whitfield?" the woman asked. "Yes, that's me. You've been served." The woman handed her the envelope and quickly walked away. Margaret's hands shook as she tore open the envelope. Legal papers spilled out, page after page of court filings, exhibits, and formal complaints. The words multi-million-dollar lawsuit jumped out at her. Across town, Elon was meeting with reporters from the local news station. His lawyer Frank had suggested getting ahead of the story. "Yes, it's unfortunate that we had to take legal action," Elon explained calmly to the journalist. "But when someone steals $42,000 worth of electricity and damages valuable research equipment, there have to be consequences." "And you have proof of this theft?" the reporter asked. Elon nodded to Frank, who played the security footage on a laptop. The reporter's eyes widened as she watched Margaret tampering with the electrical junction box. By noon, Margaret's phone was ringing nonstop. Fellow board members, neighbors, even her sister from 2 states away had seen the news. "How could you do something so stupid?" hissed Betty, her oldest friend and HOA treasurer. "Stealing electricity from Elon Marsh, of all people." "I didn't steal anything," Margaret insisted. "I was just redirecting excess energy that he wasn't using anyway." "That's not how it works, and you know it," Betty snapped. "The board is calling an emergency meeting tonight. Without you." By evening, the story had exploded online. Someone had created a meme of Margaret's face from the security footage with the caption HOA Karen, stealing electricity 1 junction box at a time. It had been shared thousands of times. Local TV news vans parked outside both Margaret's and Elon's homes. While Margaret kept her blinds drawn and ignored the doorbell, Elon invited a reporter in for a tour of his damaged lab. "This prototype battery could have stored enough energy to power a house for a week," he explained, showing the charred remains of what looked like a metal box with wires. The power surge from the illegal connection overloaded the safety systems. Headlines the next morning read, HOA already installed Elon's electricity. Now she is facing a annual $10 million lawsuit. At the courthouse, Frank laid out their case to the judge. Your Honor, we're suing Mrs. Whitfield for the cost of the stolen electricity, damages to equipment, lost research time, and abuse of her HOA position for personal vendetta. Margaret's hastily hired lawyer looked overwhelmed. Your Honor, my client disputes these outrageous claims. This is clearly an attempt by a wealthy individual to bully a dedicated community servant. The judge peered over her glasses. I've reviewed the evidence submitted, including video footage and electrical usage data. This case will proceed to trial, and I'm denying the defendant's request to seal the records. This is a matter of public interest. Outside the courthouse, 3 HOA board members approached Elon. Mr. Marsh, we want you to know that the board has voted to rescind the cease and desist order, one elderly gentleman said nervously. And Margaret has been removed as president, effective immediately. Thank you, Elon replied simply. I hope we can work together moving forward. My offer to share clean energy with interested neighbors still stands. Back at home, Margaret found a stack of official letters in her mailbox. The first was from the HOA board, confirming her removal as president. The second was from the county prosecutor's office, requesting an interview regarding potential criminal charges. As she stood frozen in her driveway, her neighbor Tom walked by with his dog. Heard about the lawsuit, he said. $1 billion, they're saying now. That's ridiculous, Margaret whispered. He can't possibly. Don't know about that, Tom shrugged. But stealing is stealing, and picking a fight with one of the richest guys in the world. Not your smartest move, Margaret. As Tom walked away, Margaret slowly sank down onto her porch steps, the letters clutched in her trembling hands. For the first time, it dawned on her that she might lose everything, her position, her reputation, maybe even her home. And this was just the beginning. Within days, lawn signs began popping up all over Hillcrest Estates. Some raved "Stand with Margaret," while others declared "Team Elon." The quiet neighborhood had turned into a battleground of opinions. At the Lucky Cup Cafe, the regular morning coffee group had split into 2 tables. The older residents who'd known Margaret for decades huddled near the window. She's always looked out for this neighborhood, argued Bob, who'd lived there for 30 years. So what if she borrowed a little electricity? That young fellow has more money than he knows what to do with anyway. Borrowed? Snorted Kathy from the next table over. That's like saying someone who breaks into your garage and takes your car is borrowing it. Conversations like this were happening all over town. At the gym, the school pickup line, even at church, people took sides. Margaret's supporters called Elon a bully using his wealth to crush a community volunteer. Elon's defenders pointed out that theft was theft, regardless of who the victim was. Meanwhile, Margaret barely left her house. She received dozens of nasty emails and had people drive by shouting "HOA Karen." Her lawyer called daily with increasingly bad news as more evidence came to light during the discovery phase of the lawsuit. They've gotten access to all the HOA financial records, her lawyer explained grimly during one call. And they found irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Margaret asked, her stomach sinking. HOA funds used to pay for your personal gardening services. Pool maintenance at your home charged to the community account. Selective enforcement of rules, fining some homeowners while ignoring violations by others. Those were administrative oversights, Margaret protested weakly. They have emails where you specifically targeted certain homeowners, her lawyer continued. Like when the Wilson family painted their door navy blue instead of the approved royal blue, and you wrote to another board member saying, and I quote, "Let's make an example of them." With each new revelation, Margaret lost more supporters. Most painful was the defection of her friend Betty, who'd been on the HOA board with her for 12 years. "I can't believe you used community funds for your own expenses," Betty said when she came to collect the HOA files from Margaret's home. "We trusted you." "It wasn't like that," Margaret insisted. "I deserved compensation for all my hours of volunteer work." Betty just shook her head and left with the boxes of documents. Across town, Elon was holding an open house. He'd invited neighbors to see his solar setup and learn how it worked. Dozens showed up, curious both about the technology and the man at the center of the neighborhood drama. The system generates more power than I can use, Elon explained to the group gathered in his backyard. My original plan was to create a mini-grid for interested neighbors once everything was tested and safe. And we could have cheaper electricity, asked a young mother holding a tumbler. About 30% less than what you're currently paying, Elon nodded. Plus, it's completely clean energy. As people toured the property, the conversation inevitably turned to Margaret. I had no idea she was so controlling, said one homeowner. She fined me $200 last year because my Christmas lights were up 2 days past January 6th. My mother was in the hospital, for goodness sake. Similar stories began to emerge. Someone had been fined because their grass was cut in the wrong pattern. Another family had been denied permission to install a wheelchair ramp for their elderly father because it affected the architectural aesthetic. By the end of the day, even Margaret's most loyal supporters were having doubts. The new interim HOA president, a retired teacher named Pat, approached Elon as the event was winding down. The board would like to discuss a settlement, Pat said quietly. This lawsuit is tearing our community apart, and frankly, after seeing all the financial irregularities, well, Margaret's actions don't represent who we are as a neighborhood. Elon nodded thoughtfully. I'm open to settling with the HOA board. But Margaret personally, after what she's done, he shook his head. Some things can't be fixed with just an apology and a check. The courthouse was packed on the morning Margaret's case was set to begin. Reporters filled the back rows, while neighbors from Hillcrest Estates took up most of the remaining seats. Margaret sat stiffly beside her lawyer, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Just as the judge entered, Margaret's lawyer leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Her face went pale. Your Honor, her lawyer said, standing, we'd like to request a brief recess to discuss a possible settlement. The judge agreed, and both legal teams disappeared into a conference room. The whispers in the courtroom grew louder. What's happening? Betty asked the person next to her. An hour later, they had their answer. Both teams returned, and Margaret's lawyer announced they had reached a settlement agreement. The terms were devastating for Margaret. She would pay $3.8 million in damages and restitution. The amount would completely wipe out her retirement accounts, investment portfolio, and most of her other assets. She would also be barred from serving on any HOA board in the state ever again. As the judge confirmed the details, Margaret sat motionless, staring straight ahead. Her lawyer had advised her to settle after reviewing the mountain of evidence against her. Going to trial would likely have resulted in an even larger judgment, possibly criminal charges, and a public airing of every HOA rule she bent for personal gain. Mrs. Whitfield, do you understand and accept these terms? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Elon for comment. This was never about the money, he told them. It was about accountability. Nobody should be above the rules they enforce on others. When asked if the amount was excessive, Elon shook his head. The damage to our research set us back months on a project that could help thousands of people access affordable clean energy. That has real costs. For Margaret, the nightmare was just beginning. To pay the settlement, she would have to sell her beloved home, the sprawling colonial on Oak Street where she'd lived for 30 years and raised her children. Real estate agents were hesitant to take the listing. The market's tough right now, one told her gently, and with all the publicity. Finally, one agency agreed, but the house sat empty during showing after showing. Potential buyers would walk through, recognize the house from the news, and leave without making an offer. After 3 price drops, Margaret received just one bid, significantly below market value. The offer came from a tech executive named Diane, who happened to be a former colleague of Elon's. You're friends with him, aren't you? Margaret asked bitterly during the final walkthrough. I worked with Elon years ago, Diane replied evenly. But that's not why I'm buying this house. I'm buying it because it has good bones, and I plan to make it the first fully solar-powered historic home in the neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. On moving day, Margaret watched as movers packed up her carefully curated life into boxes. Most of her furniture wouldn't fit in the small apartment she rented across town, the only place she could afford now. As the moving truck pulled away, A car stopped in front of her house. It was Pat, the new HOA president. "The board wanted you to have this," Pat said, handing Margaret an envelope. Inside was a card signed by some of her former neighbors, people who, despite everything, recognized her years of service to the community. "Not everyone hates you," Pat said quietly. "You did some good things for Hillcrest too. It's just, you forgot that rules need to be fair for everyone." Margaret nodded, too exhausted for arguments. 6 months later, Hillcrest Estates had changed dramatically. Elon had made good on his promise, creating a neighborhood microgrid that provided clean, affordable electricity to over half the homes. The new HOA board, led by Pat, operated with unprecedented transparency, with all meetings streamed online and financial records available to any homeowner who asked. As for Margaret's old house, it had been transformed. Solar roof tiles replaced the traditional shingles, and the garage now housed a battery wall instead of cars. Diane had kept the colonial facade but modernized everything else. On a sunny Saturday, Elon hosted a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate the completion of the microgrid project. Nearly everyone attended, enjoying food and music on his spacious lawn. "Has anyone heard from Margaret?" someone asked during a lull in conversation. "She's teaching a community college class on property management," Betty said. "Apparently, she's big on ethics now." A knowing chuckle spread through the group. As the sun set over Hillcrest Estates, Elon raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings, clean energy, and playing by the rules. Everyone drank to that, even the few who still occasionally missed the old days when Margaret ran things with an iron fist. Because if there was one lesson everyone had learned, it was that no one, not even an HOA president, was above the law. And somewhere across town, in her small apartment, Margaret was learning to live with that truth, one day at a time.